The streetlight threw a hard coin
Listen
of
to me.
amber onto wet asphalt.
When I tell you to
I
run,
heard the
don't
sound
hesitate.
before I saw the bodies. Two men, the slap of sneakers on rain-slick concrete, the soft tearing of fabric. Then a voice, small and panicked, and the echo, "Let her go." It ripped through the alley like a signal flare, and for a second the world narrowed to that single, impossible line of sound. I was 2 blocks away, baseball cap pulled low, hoodie soaked through at the shoulders. Lily was supposed to be at her piano lesson. The habit of watching the clock, of splitting my attention between homework and child custody and the muscle memory of decades spent alert for danger, was as automatic as breathing. When I saw the shape shoved against the brick, when the hand closed around the woman's wrist and the other reached for her coat, my old reflexes, boots, breath, tight hands, slid into place. I didn't think. I moved. They never tell you in the books how bright an alley can feel when you're moving toward violence. Light fractured off rain into 1,000 stars. The metal of a pocket knife flashed like a laugh. I came in under a swing that should have missed me, which made it worse, because if you miss, you still feel the sting of failure. I didn't miss. A shoulder rammed, knees hooked, my body remembering how to make leverage of lean bone and old talk. The two attackers staggered from the impact. One recovered faster and turned, eyes hard and animal. The other, taller, narrower, had his mouth open in a soundless curse, and in that bare second I saw his belt, cheap synthetic, a loop of familiar buckles. My training told me to separate, to create a line between threat and victim. My chest remembered other fights, a door kicked in, a whisper of Arabic commands in a place where the rules were blurred, boys half my age depending on me. I struck, hard. The taller man went down like a cut rope. "Get her," the shorter man barked, and the woman twisted away. She was small in the arms of the rain, collar of a wet jacket clinging to her throat. Her hair was dark and plastered to her face. She had a cut, long and thin, that bled bright under her cheekbone. What stopped me for a heartbeat, what lodged in my ribs and refused to leave, was the way she looked at me when she saw my face. Not gratitude. There wasn't time for that. It was recognition, and something rawer, an unreadable shock, like she had been holding her breath underwater and had just broken the surface. Someone shouted my name. It could have been Lily calling from some place where my ears are always tuned for her voice. It could have been an echo. I didn't answer. I wrapped an arm around the woman's ribs and pushed, felt the scrape of brick against my shoulder blade. The taller man came up, lunging, and I felt the blade press into the base of my thumb in a way that was almost clinical, sharp, minute, a notation in the ledger of my skin. I twisted. He cursed in a language I didn't know and skidded past, lost his footing on the slope of my boot, and then he was gone into the night as if the alley had spat him back out. When the woman's eyes met mine again, she said nothing. She only mouthed a syllable, like a secret she couldn't afford to speak aloud. That single, private movement, Nina, brought a different kind of heat to my neck, the kind that had nothing to do with adrenaline and everything to do with something fragile and stupid that had started between us months ago. A slow, fragile trust I'd been braiding with the care of a man who'd once disarmed bombs for a living, who had learned to measure his attachments in centimeters of safety. Her name in that ruined alley made my chest hurt in a way that was not tactical. We made it out of the alley in a mess of rain and breath and the smell of copper from her cheek. I called an ambulance with fingers that wanted to be steady for Lily's homework and for the way Nina's hand, small, calloused in an odd place, slipped into mine for a second before she turned away. It was that second that lodged like a splinter, the way our skin recognized one another but did not claim or let go. People said nothing real happens between deployments and kids and bills. They were wrong. Real things happen in small stolen seconds and late-night drives. The memory of a hand is an instrument for betrayal as much as it is for comfort. I sat in the back of the ambulance while the paramedic rapped her cheek. She wouldn't meet my eyes. Her voice was a staccato of clipped words, of facts. I was walking, 2 men, they grabbed me, thank you. But when she said my name, the syllable was not a bridge, it was a seam. She said, "Jonah." Not thank you, Jonah. It felt like a summons. Later, at the hospital, beneath fluorescent lights and the hum of other people's tragedies, I watched her sign forms. Her handwriting was careful, small, a schoolteacher's. Nina, teacher, volunteer at the shelter, The woman I let read Lily's math packet while I built a dinner and listened to her laugh about something that would have been trivial to anyone else, sat square-shouldered, chin tucked into a scar that I'd only just started to notice. When she smiled at Lily through the curtain, the wall between us could have been concrete and still she chewed the air in a way that made me think of candor and softness. But there were cracks. They started small. A misplaced text at 2 a.m. A coffee cup with lipstick I swore wasn't mine. A laugh that quarried a place in me and took my breath without giving it back. My brain, trained to look for patterns, would make them into habits, and my heart, trained by fatherhood not to explode at every tremor, would excuse them. I watched myself make compromises. I told myself she worked late, that Lily could take the car sometimes, that people needed space. When my rational mind supplied explanations, my body supplied a different truth, an ache behind the sternum like a withheld list of questions. The slow build of doubt is like salt. At first it's nothing. You put it in the stew and think it's flavor. Over time it etches out of you small, stupid irritations. The sound of the washing machine more grating, the way a nightstand looks suddenly foreign under the light. I started noticing things that didn't sit right. A name on a coffee receipt I didn't know. A thread of perfume that wasn't the one she wore the first time she fell asleep on my couch, head pillowed against my shoulder as if she belonged there. I caught myself rehearsing confrontations in the car while Lily did ballet practice. I pictured the blade of my reaction and how surgical I could be. I am not a man who lives inside my reactions. I ration them like ammo. But the human heart is a living thing, not an armory, and memory leaks. The more I tried to ignore the small betrayals, if betrayals they were, the worse they festered. They became clues, then evidence. The evidence became a case file I read by night in the glow of a lamp, late receipts, a phone I wasn't allowed to touch, texts with small emojis that read like currency. I made myself a plan: wait, watch, gather. Stay steady for Lily. The thing about suspicion is that it sharpens everything. The car keys sound louder. The kettle seems to boil with intent. You begin to see the world in terms of alibis and gaps and the geometry of exits. I watched Nina on the couch one night, knitting with a concentration I'd always admired. She was a woman who could sit with silence and let it be enough. I watched her finger a seam in her work and thought of the alley and the knife and the look in her eyes when she recognized me. I thought of all the tiny boundaries we'd negotiated, whose kid would spend Christmas where, who would take Lily to the dentist, and wondered which boundaries had been crossed without telling me. The thought of betrayal is a slow-burning fuse, not an explosion, and I felt the warmth of it against my palm. Then the messages arrived. They were not intended as evidence. They were sent with a familiarity that meant someone had let their guard down. A photo, 2 cups of coffee, a shared smile. A line: "See you tomorrow." I told myself I would be charitable. I told myself that 2 grown people can share a moment and it can mean nothing. I told myself better stories, that Nina was doing the right thing, that my jealousy was an old habit left over from missions where every shadow could hide a gun. But the rationalizations only papered over the cracks. I found myself back in the places where we had first learned each other's edges. The park where Lily kicked a ball against a chain-link fence, the diner where we'd had breakfast and argued about whether pancakes were the superior breakfast form. These places were not sanctuaries, they were evidence rooms. I began to catalogue everything Nina had told me over months. I kept receipts for the truth. I put together a timeline in my head. When I closed my eyes, the timeline became a map with routes and exits and the places where 2 lives had diverged. And yet, there was always a counterweight. I kept seeing the woman in the ambulance, hair stuck to her wet cheek, eyes like someone who had just been forced to choose what to say. There was a tremor in her smile when she saw Lily. There was fear in her hands when they trembled against mine. Betrayal, I was learning, is not always black and white. People entangle for reasons that are complicated and small: need, history, the pressure of old debts. I carried the image of her face like a photograph taken just before the shutter clicked, there, luminous, but incomplete. That night in the kitchen, I should have said something that would have been the step toward clarity. But instead I washed dishes until my knuckles burned. Nothing more eloquent than the sound of water running. Lily's laughter downstairs was a counterpoint to the discord in my chest. I thought about the life we had, paperbacks in the armchair, soccer practice, late-night homework, and about how fragile the scaffolding was that held it up. I thought about the men in the alley, about cheap belts and quick knives and the way some things are built to wound. When Nina finally came home, smelling of antiseptic and wet wool, she moved like someone who had been through a war and returned tired enough to stop pretending everything was simple. She hung her keys on the hook and said, "I'm sorry. It was nothing." The words landed like a shrug. I wanted to believe her. I wanted to trust. But there's a moment when you realize trust, once broken, becomes a ledger you keep in the face of your own hope. I put my hand on the ledger and let the rain in my bones speak. I made a decision then, half practical, half reckless. I would follow the path those messages hinted at, not with violence but with observation. I would see the spaces she occupied by night and find out whether her secrets were small or if they were knives. I would find the truth before I let myself explode, because the collateral in my life, Lily, did not deserve the shrapnel of an unconsidered reaction. There is a clarity to the moment before you decide. The world seems ordered, the storm held back by the last thin strand of calm. I kept thinking of the woman in the alley and the way she mouthed my name without asking for rescue. I kept thinking of the way the attacker's belt had looked, and what that belt could buy. I kept thinking, with a steady, cold focus, that sometimes the most dangerous thing about betrayal is not what was done, but what you let it make you become. So I followed. Not blindly. Not like the men who leap without plan. I followed like a man who had been trained to observe for windows, for exits, for the sound of a soft shoe on concrete. And I waited. Because that is what you do when the pieces are in front of you and the clock is quieter than your heart. When Nina texted, "Meet me at the old pier. 9 p.m. I felt something drop out of me and become very heavy. The part that had been pretending everything was salvageable, and the part that had been saving itself for the next thing, Lily's recital, A Quiet Life. I swallowed, put on my jacket, and walked out into the rain with the practiced steadiness of a man who knows how to hold his breath through an explosion. I did not know, then, that the night would end in the shape of that single cry, "Let her go." And that the truth I was walking toward would come wrapped in blood and slick pavement and the small, fierce courage of a woman whose face I thought I knew. I did not know the betrayal would not be the kind I expected. I only knew, with an old soldier's certainty, that some things demand the body answer before the heart can decide. The pier at night always looked like a secret someone forgot to bury. Long planks bruised by weather, lamps flickering like tired sentries, the smell of brine and diesel woven into every gust of wind. As I approached, I felt that old, familiar constriction in my ribs, the one I used to get before breaching a door. Anticipation. Calculation. The quiet hope that whatever waited on the other side wouldn't destroy what was left of you. Nina stood near the far end of the pier, her silhouette slim against the restless water. Her hood was up, but a lock of dark hair had escaped and lashed against her cheek. She looked small, fragile, and yet something in her posture, not defensive, not open, put me on edge. It was the stillness of someone preparing to tell a truth that could change the geometry of your entire life. I stepped closer. "You said you needed to talk." She didn't turn immediately. Her hands gripped the railing, knuckles white. "I'm glad you came, Jonah. I wasn't sure you would." I almost didn't. That landed somewhere inside her, a flicker of pain. She swallowed, looked out at the black water. "I owe you honesty. I owe you more than I've given. And after tonight, I don't know if you'll want anything to do with me." My jaw tightened. "Who are you meeting? The guy from the messages?" She flinched, not from accusation, but from recognition. She knew I'd been watching. Maybe she'd known for a while. Maybe she'd been leaving breadcrumbs because she didn't know how to confess. "Nina," I said, "just say it." She turned then. Her face was pale except for the healing cut on her cheek, a reminder of the alley, the knife, the moment our lives pivoted into something neither of us controlled. "I haven't cheated on you," she said, voice trembling. "But I haven't been honest either." My heartbeat slowed. Not calmer, colder. "Explain." She reached into her coat and pulled out a folded sheet of paper. Not a letter. A printed photograph. She handed it to me with a hand that shook. It was a picture of her. Standing outside a rundown building I recognized, the North Harbour Men's Shelter. Beside her was a man, tall, narrow, wearing a synthetic belt with the same distinctive buckle I had seen gleaming on the attacker in the alley. My stomach dropped through the pier. "That man," she whispered. "His name is Daniel. My brother." The word hit me like a physical blow, not because it absolved her, but because it opened a door I hadn't even known existed. "I didn't know you had a brother," I said. "You weren't supposed to," she said softly. "No one was." The wind cut between us, sharp and salt-heavy. She stepped closer, tears threatening. "Daniel disappeared 7 years ago. Drugs. Debt. Violence. My parents pretended he didn't exist anymore. I promised them I'd stay away. But I couldn't. He was my brother. I kept looking for him. Last month, I found him at that shelter." My throat tightened. "Why didn't you tell me?" "Because I knew what you'd think. That I was lying. That I was seeing someone. And because I was ashamed." Her voice cracked. "I didn't want you, or Lily, to see the mess he'd become." My fingers clenched around the photo. And the messages. "He couldn't meet me at home. He didn't want his problems reaching you or Lily. He always insisted on neutral places, cafes, the pier. He'd been sober 3 months. I was trying to help him stay that way." I stared at the picture again. The belt was unmistakable. "Nina." I forced my voice steady. "One of the men who attacked you, was he?" She nodded before I finished. "Daniel." "Yes." The pier twisted under my feet. Memories snapped into place like bones resetting. The way the attackers moved, the familiarity in the taller man's posture, the knife technique, not professional, but desperate. The way Nina had looked at me afterward, terror and recognition braided together. "He didn't know it was me," she said quickly. "He never meant, he was trying to rob me, Jonah. Not hurt me. He didn't know I was the woman he'd been meeting for weeks. He didn't recognize me in the rain until," her breath hitched, "until he saw you." My pulse hammered. "Me?" "He knows you. Or at least, he knows of you. I told him about you. That I trusted you. That you protected people." Her eyes glistened. "When he saw you fighting them, fighting him, he panicked. He thought I'd betrayed him to someone dangerous." "And the other man?" "His dealer. The one Daniel owed money to. They were using him to get cash. And when he couldn't pay," she shook her head. "Everything spiraled." The truth was a shockwave spreading outward, rearranging reality in its wake. Betrayal existed, yes, but not the kind I had feared. Not romantic. Not intentional. Something worse, betrayal born of fear, of shame, of love twisted into knots too tight to untangle. I exhaled through my teeth. "Where is he now?" Her lip trembled. "Missing. After the alley, he ran. I haven't heard from him since." We stood there, the wind pulling at our clothes like restless hands. I felt anger, real anger, swell in my chest. Not at her. Not exactly. At the secrets. At the danger she'd walked into alone. At the fact that my daughter could have lost one of the only stable adults in her life because someone couldn't ask for help. "You should have told me," I said, voice low. "I was trying to protect you," she whispered. "That's not how protection works. Not with me." She closed her eyes. "I know." The pier breaks open. A sudden clang broke the fragile quiet, a metal footstep on the ramp leading down to the lower dock. We both spun. A figure emerged from the shadows, soaked through, shivering. His clothes hung off him. His cheek bore a fresh bruise. And the belt, the synthetic one, was unmistakably his. "Nina," he rasped. She gasped. "Daniel." Instinct snapped through me. I stepped between them. He held up both hands. "I'm not here to hurt anyone." "You were never supposed to find us here," Nina said, voice wavering. Daniel's eyes darted around, frantic. "They're after me. I didn't know where else to go." "Who's after you?" I asked, though I already knew. "The dealer. The one from the alley. He thinks I set him up. He wants revenge." Footsteps echoed from the pier entrance. Slow, deliberate, confident. A silhouette appeared, broad-shouldered, wearing a dark hooded jacket. Nina grabbed my sleeve. "Jonah." "I see him." The man's voice boomed across the planks. "Thought you could run forever, Danny boy." Daniel backed away, nearly slipping. "Jonah," he whispered, terror-stricken. "I'm sorry, for the alley. I didn't know." I didn't answer. I didn't have the luxury of processing forgiveness. My brain had already shifted gears, calculating angles, available cover, the nearest exit, the potential weight distribution of the pier's aging planks. The dealer stepped forward, a pistol gleaming at his side. Nina gasped. "Jonah." "Get behind me," I ordered. She obeyed instantly. Daniel froze. The dealer smiled. "Look at this. The hero. The woman. The junkie. A sweet little family reunion." "You don't want to do this," I said calmly. "Oh, but I do." He lifted the gun toward Nina. "Starting with her." "No." Daniel lunged. The gun fired. Once. The shot echoed across the water like lightning ripping the sky open. Daniel staggered, clutching his shoulder, collapsing to his knees. Nina screamed. And in the fraction of a second that the dealer turned his aim back toward her, toward the woman I had saved once already, the woman whose secrets had almost torn us apart, my training took over. I closed the distance between us in 3 long strides. A twist of his wrist. A wrench. A pivot. The gun skittered across the planks and vanished between the gaps, swallowed by black water. He swung at me wildly. I ducked. His fist grazed my cheek. I struck his jaw. He reeled, stumbled, and crashed into the railing. Wood cracked. For a moment, the world held its breath. Then the railing broke. He fell backward into the churning dark. Silence expanded around us. The aftermath. Nina dropped to her knees beside Daniel. "Stay with me. Daniel, stay with me." She pressed her hands against his bleeding shoulder. He winced but forced a smile. "You shouldn't have come." "You're my brother," she sobbed. I knelt beside them. "We need to get him to a hospital." Daniel's eyes, glassy with pain, lifted to mine. "I'm sorry," he whispered. "For everything. I didn't want her dragged into my mess." I looked at him, really looked, and in his face I saw the same desperate fear I'd seen in the alley. The fear of a man drowning long before anyone noticed he'd gone under. "You can still fix this," I said quietly. "If you want to." He nodded faintly. "I do." Nina held his face in both hands, tears streaking. "Then we'll do it together." I called for an ambulance. The truth between us. Later, when Daniel was taken away under flashing red lights, Nina and I stood alone on the pier, exhaustion hanging on us like wet canvas. She spoke first. "I never meant to betray you." I shook my head. "I know." She swiped at her cheeks. "You're angry." "I'm scared," I corrected. "You were walking into danger alone. I can't lose you. Lily can't lose you." Her breath hitched. "You still want me." I stepped closer, rain softening around us. Wanting someone and trusting someone are different things. But I want to rebuild both. Her eyes widened, hopeful and wounded. Even after everything. Especially after everything. Slowly, carefully, she touched my hand. Her fingers were cold, trembling, and absolutely real. The twist. Just as I leaned into her touch, her phone buzzed. She glanced at the screen. Her face drained. "What is it?" I asked. She handed me the phone. A message. From Daniel. "Don't trust the police. They weren't after me. They were after you. There's more you don't know. I'm sorry." A second message came through immediately, as if slamming the point home. "Jonah, this goes back to your last deployment." The rain fell harder. The pier seemed to tilt. And I understood, far too late, that betrayal had only just begun.